Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The FCC is going to be reintroducing net neutrality regulations, which would reinstate the classification of broadband as a telecommunications service under Title II of the Communications Act. This is something that we thought might happen with a fifth commissioner on the FCC, and sure enough, right after she was approved and sworn in, this is taking place. So I'll be right back. We'll take a quick look at an article on that, and we will hear from Chairwoman Rosenworcel and some comments that she made. Be right back. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So this kind of broke the last few days, and then I think it was Tuesday. Chairwoman Rosenworcel, Jessica Rosenworcel, did a speech at the FCC and talked about doing this. And then today, the notice of proposed rulemaking came out. So I was going to look at a couple of things here. So this is a story that was in multi-channel news. I've also got some, again, some video that I'll show here and comment on from Jessica Rosenworcel. So you see here, FCC Chair Rosenworcel tees up return of net neutrality rules. So this was actually 2 days ago before she made the speech. FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel is wasting no time trying to leverage her new Democratic majority by teeing up a big ticket item, net neutrality. Rosenworcel plans to announce an effort to reinstate net neutrality rules at a speech at the National Press Club on Tuesday, September 26th. Maybe that's where it was. The planned speech comes just a day after Ana Gomez was sworn in as the fifth FCC commissioner and the third Democrat on the panel, giving Rosenworcel the Democratic majority she's been waiting for most of the 3 years. Then Commissioner Rosenworcel had opposed the rules elimination and had signaled that after she became chair that she wanted to reinstate them. So this was after the Trump administration and Chairman Pai basically reversed the regulations that had been put in place under the Obama administration. But without a Democratic majority since she took over, due to Congress's inability to confirm a nominee until just recently, Rosenworcel has been unable to muster the political majority to tackle non-bipartisan items because they've been basically deadlocked at 2-2. Gomez has signaled that she supports robust Title II-based net neutrality rules. Fellow Democratic Commissioner Jeffrey Starks is also on the record supporting the rules, so Rosenworcel would appear to have the vote she needs. So she definitely has the vote she needs. So I'll skip some of this. There's lots of commentary from people on both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, as well as some associations for internet service providers, those kinds of things. You see here WISPA and ACA Connect. So I've linked to this. I also linked to the full video of her speech. And I also linked to a response from, and this is not a response as what was happening today. This was a post in the National Review that former Chairman Pai wrote back in June of this year when he was, I think, pretty certain that we were going to be seeing this come up again. And really what the headline tells it all. He says the death of the internet 5 years later. So his point is that despite predictions of the death of the internet, here we are 5 years later, and it's still very much alive. So that is one of the arguments from people that are not for reinstating net neutrality rules because they weren't needed in the first place, and there's no difference basically when they're there or not. So Chairwoman Rosenworcel tries to make a case that they are needed, and former Chairman Pai makes a case here as to why they rolled it back and why they're not needed. So I linked to this article as well. So again, I've linked to those three things and the full video. But now I want to take a quick look at some of her comments from yesterday and maybe comment on her comments. So here we go. And I need to start it somehow. See if this will do it. Well, there it is. Oh, I missed the button.
Thanks, Will, and thank you, everyone, for being here. You know, it was more than 3 years ago when the COVID virus reached our shores and upended day-to-day life. I don't know if you remember those early days, but I thought it was bewildering. We were told to stay home, hunker down, and live life online. So I grabbed what I thought was important at work and I moved my office to my dining room table success.
So right there, I kind of skipped after that. So she talked a lot about the pandemic and how that really brought out the need for broadband service. And we all recognize that. So once the pandemic occurred, we realized a lot of people at home all at once. We had kids trying to do school from home and having to do that, over their internet connection. We had parents at home trying to do their work over the internet connection. So suddenly you got a lot of people using their internet, especially during times of the day when a lot of times there were not people there normally. So you'd have the parents maybe at work, you'd have the kids at school. And really when you had your demand was in the peak times tended to be prime time, like TV watching time, broadband time, like everybody got home from school and work. And then suddenly it was happening all day long, internet. And then also you had people that were trying to do video calls. So there was a lot more demand for upstream broadband. And we did see that take its toll on some networks, especially those that were really not prepared. And when I say not prepared, I mean they were just older technology like DSL, maybe some slower fixed wireless. Cable in some cases had some issues because cable is restricted by on the upstream much more so than, let's say, fiber, which is not. It can be symmetrical. But even on the cable side, cable operators really stepped up to the plate there and made lots of changes they were able to very well keep up with demand because they could do some splits and things that would improve the upstream, and the kind of service, the upstream that they were provided was pretty much sufficient for people anyway. So while some people who didn't have good broadband, it was certainly noticed. And that is something that we discovered was really, really important. Before, people might have been getting by. It's like, well, I can use my phone and do stuff, and then I can go to work. And if I need to do something there, I can do that. But it wasn't as noticed as it was during the pandemic. That's when everybody was like, wow, we really need a wired or a good fixed wireless connection, and in order to get what we need done. So she makes that point, but really that's kind of not that important as far as net neutrality goes. It's really not related, I should say, to net neutrality. We realized we had a problem with broadband connectivity. It was not a net neutrality problem. So I kind of skipped that section.
We need broadband to reach 100% of us, and we need it to be fast, open, and fair.
So she says fast, open, and fair, and that's a common theme. And I believe it does certainly need to be faster in places. Again, that's not a net neutrality question. Open, it is open. So there's not a net neutrality issue right now. And then fair, not sure. Fair would be, I guess, not discriminating traffic. That's not really done today. Obviously, there's places where we might say don't have internet, and they should, maybe because they're low-income areas, those kinds of things, and that's being worked on. But that's not a net neutrality issue. That is a broadband deployment issue and more equality as far as access to internet. So again, not a net neutrality issue there.
Yet even as our society reconfigured itself to do so much online, our institutions haven't always kept up. Today, there is no expert agency ensuring that the internet is fast, open, and fair.
And I would say that the FCC is trying to ensure that. It's certainly the way that they're tackling that now is trying to reintroduce these regulations. But when they were repealed, the FCC still had the ability to look into issues. And then what Chairman Pai did was he had a agreement with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, that if they did find someone doing something that they should not be doing, that the FTC then would take action. So he was, rather than having additional rules under Title II of the Telecommunications Act, which was, by the way, originally drafted in 1936. So it tells you it was old and not meant for broadband. I mean, it was really meant for old telephone service, plain old telephone service, POTS lines. So they said, we don't want to try to shoehorn in Title II regulations for broadband. We want to keep it as an information service and not as a telecommunications service. And she talked about how the internet being open is a good thing. I can't remember if that's something that I captured here that's a little bit later, or it was an earlier what I cut out. But and it was open, and President Clinton started with it being open because he knew that would help. Not having a lot of regulation or any regulation to speak of would help with the growth of the internet. And there certainly are, like I say, there are things that are regulated with the internet, but a light touch is what we want. And Chairman Chairwoman Rosenworcel's her position is that what they did with Title II originally was a light touch, but it was under Title II. And the problem some people have with that is that it really does kind of open it up to creep, let's say regulation creep, where you can start pulling other things from the regulations. So a lot of people, including myself, felt it was a problem. Excuse me, it was regulations in search of a problem, because there were never really any major issues with net neutrality. We had some things that cropped up prior to net neutrality rules. For example, I think it was Comcast for a while was throttling some P2P traffic, the file sharing traffic. And that was because a lot of that file sharing stuff was impacting their network. And it turned out to be not their customers who were sharing illegal software downloads and illegal copyrighted material. So they were throttling that. So that was addressed without net neutrality regulations, and that stopped happening. And the same thing happened when a provider, I think, was trying to throttle people that did not have their own video service, that were getting video service from somewhere else. That was also handled prior to net neutrality regulations.
Since the birth of the modern internet, the FCC has played that role. And if you think about it, it makes sense. These are principles that have deep origins in communications law and history. After all, back in the era when communications meant telephony, each and every call went through, and the phone company could not cut you off from your call or decide to edit the content of your conversation.
And nobody's editing content of conversations or cutting anybody off on purpose, certainly as far as broadband goes. Now, it's interesting, editing of conversations actually, where that's been an issue, and this is another problem with these net neutrality regulations, is this is all impacting broadband providers. And broadband providers, they're in the business of providing a good, solid broadband connection. And everybody may not be happy with everything their broadband provider does. And I know we've got work to do on making sure everybody can get fast, reliable internet. But in general, they're in the business to provide that connection, and they want their customers to be able to get to anywhere legal that they can get to. Right? So that's not an issue. Where we have an issue with, let's say, editing things might be on the big tech companies, search engines that maybe reduce results. And certainly we've seen issues with some of the social media sites that are deplatforming or reducing the exposure of certain ideas and speech. And while we want to make sure we have free speech, we're going to need to be careful to some extent, but we don't want to be having big tech companies be the arbiters. So the biggest issue that we've seen in the last few years has nothing to do with the broadband operators. It's more on what those who can control what we see and what we hear from social media and, again, search engines, those kinds of things have been the main issue.
Now fast forward to the present. Communications means a whole lot more than just phone calls. It means access to the internet, because broadband is the most important infrastructure of our time. But as a result of the previous FCC's decision to abdicate authority, the agency charged with overseeing communications has limited ability to oversee these indispensable networks and make sure that for every consumer, their access is fast, open, and fair. I think that's not right. Because for everyone everywhere to enjoy the full benefits of the internet age, internet access should be more than just accessible and affordable. The internet needs to be open, and that's what I want to talk about today. The internet's open design is revolutionary. It is right there at its foundation. It means creating without permission, building community beyond geography, organizing without physical constraints, consuming content where you want it and when you want it, and cultivating ideas not just around the corner, but across the globe.
Again, that's her point there is the internet has been open, and that's why it's been so successful. That's why it's grown the way it has, and it has been open, and there's really nothing that's been preventing that. And certainly, again, the exchange of ideas, the only thing that's been preventing that idea is that not all ideas by some who are in control of these these large tech companies that can kind of control speech. Some of them have been actually trying to manipulate them.
I believe it is essential that we sustain this foundation of openness, and that's why, since I have served at the FCC, I have always supported net neutrality. Now, at this point, I think it's worth acknowledging that net neutrality is one of the most widely discussed issues in telecommunications policy. But the debate around it often yields more heat than light. So I'm going to keep my comments on the history here short, but focus on the basics. So roll back before the pandemic, before the smartphone era, before the Washington football team called itself the Commanders.
And don't get me started on that.
Let's start in 2005. That was when the FCC adopted its first open internet policy statement, which was built on policies that had long been in communications law and history. The agency made clear that when it came to net neutrality, consumers should expect that their broadband providers would not block, throttle, or engage in paid prioritization of lawful internet traffic.
So those are 3 items there. And again, there were some issues with some throttling again from, and these were things that should not be happening, where a service provider would be throttling. Again, it might be somebody that provides pay TV, and they were throttling a over-the-top video service, for example, because that interfered with them, let's say, impact. It was like a competitor, and that was handled without net neutrality regulations, and that should not be done. And blocking, I can't think of any blocking, but the paid prioritization, that was something that was, I think, the impetus for the regulations coming out. And that would be, she mentions this being kind of impacting consumers, but it might have an impact as far as maybe some pricing with certain services. But that is referring to, for example, where a network operator might charge Netflix to get prioritization of their traffic. And the problem with that is that's not a good policy either, because the problem with that is that really makes it more difficult for a Netflix competitor, for example, that can't afford that prioritization, to come in there and pay that. So that could mean that you don't get new startups that would compete. So there's not a problem with that. And we haven't seen paid prioritization, even with the net neutrality regulations coming down, because threat of regulation sometimes is just as good as having regulations. Really, it's better, the threat, because it's not burdensome on the internet service providers or anybody else, because it's just a threat that, hey, if you misbehave, we are going to stop it, and we might implement regulations if needed that would do that, and nobody in business wants that.
In other words, your broadband provider had no business cutting off access to websites, slowing down internet services, and censoring online speech.
So again, stopping access to websites. I'm not sure what she's talking about there. Again, it's in the interest of every internet service provider to provide access to every single website on the internet, assuming it's legal content. I mean, obviously things like child pornography, those kinds of things. We're trying to block that kind of stuff. Everybody, as an industry and as a culture. But I can't think of anybody that was blocking access to websites, unless there's something I'm not aware of. And I guess the concern there is that somebody might block access to a competitor or something like that. But internet service providers, they're in the business of providing connectivity. They want people to get everywhere that they can, and in general, the paid prioritization would not impact someone's ability to get somewhere. It might, I suppose, impact maybe the quality of service on a competing platform, and again, that's not a good thing.
Your broadband provider was not allowed to play favorites, like steering you fast to some online service that had given them a payout and assigning you to a bumpy road for those who had not offered up the same pay.
And I think she mischaracterizes that, because the broadband provider would not be steering you somewhere. It would be if you went to Netflix, you might have a better experience than if you went to company B that didn't have the paid prioritization.
As a consumer, you could go where you want and do what you want online without your broadband provider getting in the way or making choices for you.
And that's the case today, and that was the case prior to any regulations, other than the few things that were handled.
Now, after 10 years of policymaking and what I think were, when I count, 3 rounds of litigation, in 2015, the FCC finally adopted net neutrality protections that were upheld by the courts. The FCC had produced open internet policies that passed judicial muster. We had clear rules of the road, and those rules were popular. 80% of Americans support open internet and net neutrality policies.
And that's not really a fair assessment, because I think I would say the only reason it's 80% is because probably 20% don't know what the question means. If you asked 100% of the people, they should all say, yes, we support an open internet. I support an open internet. The question is, and do you support net neutrality? If the people answer not thinking that net neutrality means an open internet, then they're also going to say, yeah, I support an open internet. The question is, do you support regulations that would ensure that? And I can see where a lot of people might say, yeah, I support regulations that would ensure that, but they're not business owners. They're not broadband providers that would have to deal with the regulations and the costs involved in that. And that's a very important point. So whenever you see polls about net neutrality and people supporting it, a lot of times it's because they think if the rules are not there, then we're not going to have a net neutral internet, and we're not going to have an open internet, and there are going to be all kinds of problems. And we saw that people thought that when these regulations were going to be repealed, prior to them being repealed. So I think a lot of people don't understand that, and that is the reason that there was so much uproar.
So this looked like it was going to be the end of the net neutrality saga, but not so. Because in 2017, the last administration took it up again and did something different. It announced that it would break with over a decade of consistent FCC policy and repeal the FCC's open internet rules, the ones that were held up by the court. Now, the public backlash was overwhelming. Maybe you remember it. People lit up our phone lines, clogged our email inboxes, and jammed our online comment system.
And that's true, that happened. But here's why that happened.
To express their disapproval.
I am calling upon all of you, the internet's time wasters and troublemakers, to join me once more in just 5 to 10 minutes of minor effort. I need you to do this. Once more unto the breach, my friends. Simply go to this URL and tell the FCC to preserve net neutrality and Title II.
So, this was on HBO, a talk show guy there. And so a lot of people went to this site, and kind of a funny URL there, gofccyourself.com. So, and that actually pointed and still points to the FCC website. But at that point, it was pointing to the comments section of the FCC website. So anybody that had this URL, that got it from watching this show, and then certainly any viral forwarding of this URL would have went to all kinds of people who then went to that site, which was then directed to the FCC comment sections. And it either brought down the FCC site because it was just so much traffic, or the FCC said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous, it's slowing down our site, and they block that. And you don't have to let some other site point to your website. So it still does, though. As I say, if you go there, it does not go to their comment section. You just get like a error page that you're somewhere that shouldn't be, not necessarily shouldn't be, but that there's no content there. But it's still there.
Once again, commenters, America needs you to rise, or more accurately, remain seated in front of your computer screen to this occasion. So please, fly, my pretties, fly once more!
And despite this overwhelming opposition from the public, the FCC repealed net neutrality. In fact, the FCC's actions were so extreme, the United States Senate voted to restore the agency's open internet protections. Now, I believe this repeal of net neutrality put the FCC on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of the law, and the wrong side of the American public. It was not good then, and it makes even less sense now. It determined that this infrastructure, which the pandemic proved is so essential for modern life, needs no oversight, and I think that's just wrong.
And again, under Chairman Pai's policies, there was oversight via the FCC. They still had oversight, and anything that they were unable to enforce, they could then they were working in conjunction with the FTC.
So today we begin a process to make it right. This afternoon, I'm sharing with my colleagues a rulemaking that proposes to reinstate net neutrality. This is a first step. When we vote on this rulemaking, we will invite public comment about how restoring net neutrality rules can help ensure internet access is fast, open, and fair. All right, so what happens next?
I think the part I cut out, she talked a lot about, I'm trying to remember. Well, anyway, I linked to the full video. You can watch it. But I know she talked about, she did the history of that. I think we saw that. So I can't recall what that was, but there was a cut there.
On Thursday, I will release the full text of this rulemaking. It seeks comment and putting back in place policies to prevent your broadband provider from engaging in blocking, throttling, and paid prioritization, along with a general conduct rule that prohibits your broadband provider from unreasonably interfering or unreasonably disadvantaging consumers from going where they want and doing what they want on the internet. Now, for consumers, this means internet openness, security, safety, and one nationwide net neutrality standard they can count on.
I do remember that. I think she talked about, during that, she talked about some of the objections that some of those that are opposed to net neutrality regulations bring up, or some of the points they bring up. I think she covered some of those. And one thing she said, I don't think I captured that. Maybe it is coming up here. But one thing she said was that a lot of people will say, well, nothing happened when, again, look at Chairman Pai's article 5 years later and the internet is not dead. She says, well, some states implemented net neutrality regulations, including California. So that's what has kept it open, but that's just not true. Again, there were no regulations prior to what was implemented during the Obama administration. And one state or a couple of states is not going to make that difference. It would in that state. But, again, I think really what's keeping the internet open is the fact that the FCC does have oversight. And there's always that threat of action, and there's always that threat of additional regulations if needed. And I'm not against regulation. Regulation is important if it's needed, when it's needed. But if it's not needed, it's just a cost to business, to doing business. And if it's a cost to doing business, and that business is in the business of broadband, and that business wants to expand broadband, they want to make their speeds faster for their customers, they want to upgrade their networks. The more regulations you throw on there, the higher their costs go. That means the higher the price to the consumer goes. That means new broadband operators that want to get in business have to deal with those regulations. And that's a cost for them to get in the business. It's a barrier to entry. So I think regulations are important when there is a reason for them. I don't like regulations that are searching for a problem or that are trying to prevent a problem that either hasn't happened or that has been handled and can be handled through the current laws or authority of government agencies. In the case of the FCC and the FTC, that exists.
3 weeks from now, on October 19th, I'll ask my colleagues to vote. And if we get at least 3 votes, we will kick off this rulemaking, and I promise you, I will do a lot of listening. We all need to have an open mind and would all benefit from a fresh record on this subject. Now, as we move forward, I want to make one last plea. I have every expectation that this process will get messy at times. I have, in fact, been to this rodeo before. And I believe peaceful protests are a sign of a healthy democracy. What I worry about is when things get ugly. In the past, when this subject came up, we had death threats against Chairman Pai and his family. That is completely unacceptable. And I'm grateful to the law enforcement that brought the individual behind these threats to justice. We had a fake bomb threat that was called in to disrupt a vote. I know, I was there. We had protesters blocking Chairman Wheeler in his driveway and keeping him from his car. And we saw a dark effort to tear down a pro-net neutrality candidate for the agency.
So I think one thing we can be pretty sure of is that there won't be any issues from those that do not want net neutrality. What she's talking about there would been the other side, I think, when net neutrality was going to be removed, the net neutrality regulations, I should say, because again, a lot of the public, especially those that were so upset, thought that as soon as those regulations were removed, it's like suddenly, information would stop, the internet would be under control, and, you wouldn't be able to go where you wanted to go. So it's like quite often happens on one side is if you make the other side out to be evil, a fascist Hitler kind of government, then anything goes, including bomb threats, including death threats, including rioting and burning stuff down. So I don't think you're going to see any of that since this is going in the other direction. So I understand the point she's making here, but that should always be the case, in my opinion. But unfortunately, quite often it comes from the other side because the issue can be mischaracterized a lot of times.
I recognize that those who go to these extremes are not listening to or reading these remarks, but those of you who are set the tone for the debate. So make some noise, raise a ruckus, but keep it in the lines. Above all, keep speaking up. We are here now because so many people let the agency know that this issue matters. We are here now because the COVID pandemic taught us with painful clarity just how important broadband access is in modern life. In the United States, we have now made a historic commitment to make sure that high-speed internet access reaches all. We have invested in this infrastructure like never before. Now let's make sure it's fast, open, and fair for consumers everywhere. Thank you.
So in the closing statement, again, she kind of mixed things up there. So yeah, we do want fast broadband. We want it to be available to everybody. We want it to be open. Everybody wants to be open, and it is open. So, I think they should be focusing on what we all know needs to be done, which is making sure that everybody can get access to fast, reliable internet. And then open is something, if for some reason something comes up where some company is doing something they shouldn't be doing, I have every confidence that if there were not net neutrality regulations in place, that would be addressed. It will be addressed. It would be addressed, obviously, with net neutrality regulations in place. So, again, it's something I don't think is needed. Now, I remember now what the part that was cut out there. It was a lengthy time where she was talking about Title II, and by removing Title II, it removed other kinds of things that the FCC could do and made it more difficult. She even talked about pole attachments, and that might be something that she has a point there. Maybe that they don't have maybe control over that, and making sure that, for example, broadband companies can get access to poles. But these are all things that can be done through other kinds of rules and through Congress. And in fact, Ana Gomez, when she was being interviewed, or as far as to be approved, I believe something that she said, and it was very clear that she was for net neutrality. So I want to go back to something that Jessica Rosenworcel said, which was that there was this campaign against a FCC chairwoman that was because of her net neutrality position, but it really wasn't, because everybody knew Ana Gomez was for net neutrality. That was more about comments that had been made and whether it indicated that she might not be fair as far as Fox News, and here she is, would be somebody that would be making regulations and those kinds of things. And if she has a bias against somebody like Fox News, that's a bias against, let's say, one conservative outlet. There's not that many outlets out there, media outlets, that the FCC would be over, that would be conservative. So that was the problem there. Because again, Ana Gomez, everybody knew that she even said in her answer, she said, I'm for Title II. She said she'd prefer it be done through Congress. That's something I would prefer as well, is that somebody, if they want these things, these various kinds of things, that they then go ahead and have a limited approach and do it through Congress. Again, it could be something on pole attachments. Just do that. So you could have a bill that could cover a few different things. Make sure, that if you don't want paid prioritization, that could include that. Reasonable network management could be something that could be in there, although that needs to be, there needs to be some leeway there, because broadband providers need to be able to manage their network. And that is something that, again, could be a high cost for them if you take away that ability to be able to do some network management, as long as they're doing it fairly. That's really the key. You don't want to throttle one set of people because of who they are or because of where they're going. However, you might have different tiers of service that you provide people. And it's like if you pay less money, then you're going to get a certain amount of usage per month. And if you pay more money, then you're going to be able to get more bandwidth. And that's just that's the same thing that you get from your water company, right? So if you are using if you're using very little water and you've got a neighbor who's out there washing 3 cars because he's got 3 teenagers, and then they're all taking half-hour showers, and the mom's doing 6 loads of laundry a week, and maybe you and your wife are using much less water, you would hope to not have to pay the same as that neighbor across the street for your water service because it's based on the kind of usage that you're using. So those kinds of things are fair, I think, for the broadband provider, and it's fair for those that are not using as much broadband service, that they should be able to maybe get a lower price and be able to have a lower tier. So those are the kinds of things that I think the free market is meant to decide, not necessarily government. Things like pricing, that's the free market that should decide that, not the government. So, this is me being a free market kind of person. So that's my opinion. You may feel differently, and certainly you can leave comments on the video if you feel differently and want to make a case for net neutrality. I understand that. If you feel the same, you can make comments about that. But this is it's going to be contentious again, but now they've got the 5 votes that they have on the FCC. I think there were a couple of ex-Obama officials that said, don't even bother doing this because they'll get struck down by the Supreme Court. I don't know if that's the case. They may be saying that because the Supreme Court has more conservatives on it, but those conservatives that are on the Supreme Court, actually, they look at the Constitution, and as you can tell from court rulings that have come through, they don't always go with the Republicans because they're looking at the Constitution. So if there's something, something like that, that doesn't, just because it's a Republican issue doesn't mean they're going to vote that way. So certainly if it goes to the Supreme Court, it could be upheld. Lower courts upheld that earlier, and I don't think they'd overturn that. I don't think that's an issue that they would, but who knows? You never know. So thanks for joining me again. If you want to comment on the video, just go ahead and do that. If you're not subscribed to our channel, if you'd click the subscribe button, I'd appreciate that. And click the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. If you found this interesting, helpful, go ahead and click the thumbs up on the video. Give me a like there. And again, down below in the description, you'll find a link to the full video that you can watch for yourself, as well as those couple of other things that I showed you today. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.